didn't know the story about Henry Wallace. And then when I was watching that and then knowing I feel like it's exactly what happened to Bernie Sanders, and we just keep repeating it. And the same thing is true with our imperial empire, is we just keep repeating the same things over and over again. And I guess my main question for you is, do you feel like we've learned anything? You know, I mean, like, have we made any progress?
I don't want to be depress you on Veterans Day, Jen. It's very hard to believe that we have. Our education system keeps churning out the same material. They don't really change it. They pretend to change it, but you don't get a thorough picture of World War II, which is crucial, and the American changes after World War II. And that's what that's what motivated me to do the series, was to get to the heart of this thing. Why are we in these wars? Why have we not changed our way of thinking? And I think the answer is, over time, has come very clearly to many of us, is that money is at the root of this.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's all for profit. And, you know, people seem to know the Eisenhower quote, like people somehow know that quote, but I don't think people really understand the depth of the problem that we're dealing with and the magnitude of the issue. And obviously you definitely touch on this with JFK. And then I went down this whole rabbit hole from something on what you said about the Dulles brothers. And then I ended up down this whole rabbit hole of stuff, and I can totally geek out about that. But, I know you have something you wanted to say.
No, I'm actually listening right now, and I think it is very important.
You said something. You mean I touched on it on JFK? I have a documentary coming out on Showtime on their app and on their network, their cable station, coming out on the 20th or 20. I think it's the 20th, and the 12th they have the app. Showtime app, and then it will be wider in January. But this is called JFK Revisited, and it's after 30 years, I went back and I looked at the film, and I tried to put all the facts, the most important facts that we knew about the case, in one framework for an audience looking for a documentary. Not remember, the 1991 film was a dramatization.
Yeah.
And I had to take liberties to make it into a film length, but it was pretty accurate, I thought. And this is a real update for you. And I think those people who care will be really moved by it. There's a 2-hour version that's coming out, and then also available will be a 4-hour version. And we care about this. We care about this because the lessons of Kennedy still apply today. It's ironic that our president, Joe Biden, is an Irish Catholic, and if anything, he should have some empathy for this man and what happened to him. And he unfortunately postponed the release of the so-called last documents another 3 years recently. According to the reason given was COVID.
Right.
COVID prevent people from reading files or opening them.
You know,
I'm running out of excuses.
They are. And what's interesting is growing up. So I was in high school. I think I was in high school when Platoon came out. So you were definitely framed as somebody that was radical and conspiracy theorist. And like, you were definitely painted that way. And obviously, as I got older, I realized, no, that's not how this goes. But how has that been for you? I mean, obviously you don't really give a crap, but in terms of that sort of, you know what I'm saying? Like, is that, you've obviously heard these things, and it's so funny to me, because to me, anyone who would believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone is just, that's insane. Like who would think that? That's just ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
I know, right?
It's ridiculous because, well, just from the visual evidence alone, you can see the very first reaction of the president is he reaches for his throat. Now, it's obviously, to those people who do any kind of reading, it's from the front. The shot is from the front. So the moment you have another shooter, you have a shooter from the rear, you have a shooter, you may have two shooters from the rear, you may have a shooter and a shooter from the front or more. You have more than one. And
right.
How do we know that? Because the Zapruder film locked it down to 6.3 seconds. The crime took place in 6.3 seconds, the shots. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. And the the film, the documentary, goes to great lengths to disprove the ballistics and the fingerprints, the rifle, everything that happened that day. All of the basic evidence that the Warren Commission took to make their judgment is flawed. It wouldn't hold up in court, and we show you why. I don't want to belabor it, but it's really important that people understand there was more than 3 shots. There was probably 5 or 4, I think, or 6. I'm not sure. No one knows exactly what happened.
But we know it wasn't one.
But we do know that there was more than one direction. Right. There was wounds. Okay, there was wounds in his. Every one of those bullets can be discussed.
Well, James Tague alone just completely eliminates the magic bullet theory, and just every story that came out. And of course, I was younger. But I can remember very well Christmas season '91 when the film came out, and the way that it was just branded as such a controversial film. Because again, even as a kid, you're in school, and I was always fascinated by the presidents. But when they said that, some guy's trying to suggest that, Lee Harvey Oswald did not assassinate the president, could you even put in perspective what it would be like today in the information age and the, mile-a-minute media age that we're living in today? If you were to release a film like that now, what that would have been like, and the hysteria that may have surrounded it. Because there was hysteria 30 years ago, Oliver, but today I can't even imagine what it would be like in this information age.
Well, today there would have been multiple cameras on the assassination. There would have been iPhones, and there would have been all kinds of technology. This thing would not stand up. I don't know exactly where we want to go with this conversation, because I don't want to drag it into, but the film is very important that people see it. And I think people will be interested in seeing it, even if they know nothing about Kennedy, because we go out of our way to paint a picture of a warrior for peace. Kennedy was a whole generational change from the previous Eisenhower and Truman administrations. He comes more as a descendant of Roosevelt, in the 1930s and early 40s. He was Roosevelt. We differ in our untold history. We go up to great lengths to show the differences between Truman and Roosevelt, and how Truman dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the attitude of opening the Cold War, creating a Cold War. Now we have to get to the basis of what was the Cold War about, and in whose interest was it to begin a Cold War? And we keep coming back to the same information. Truman declared the Cold War when he declared the Truman Doctrine against Greece and Turkey in 1947. Then he formed the CIA, and he did all kinds of things to keep that. He was told by Senator Vandenberg, the Republican, create fear in the American people. That's the way you're going to get this thing financed. Mm. The actual model for the Cold War is Nazi Germany, actually. The people who were in Wall Street, like my father was in Wall Street, and he was a Republican, so I grew up with this mentality. I understand it. And my father was an intelligent man. I don't put it down. But people like Paul Nitze, for example, was a Wall Street broker. He married an heiress. He was in the 29 crash. He married an heiress and he went on to be one of the fiercest advocates for militarizing our economy. His argument was the Depression is going to come. It's going to come back again. We can't employ all these people. We've got to militarize this sector of the economy. And he said the best example of this was Hitler. He had traveled to Germany in the 1930s before Hitler became the bad guy, and he much admired the resurrection of the German economy through militarization. Same thing was true of Mussolini to a degree. So you have all these Wall Street guys like Forrestal, Nitze, and richer people than that even, who are admirative. And you have to go back to the history of World War II to understand how how many Americans supported the fascist movement in that time. From Lindbergh through the richest people in the country. Yeah. But of course, when the war got hot, then they backed off. But many of them kept trading with the Germans, and we go into that in untold history.
So we do have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, so you have a very strong fascist movement in the United States, especially in business circles. So Nitze comes up with this concept that the best way the American economy is going to survive with all the reentry of all these men from World War II is militarize the economy, which is what they did gradually. Eisenhower was a big role in that. He played the most important role, and he's at fault for this, and he knows it. And I think that's why he said it at the end of his term. Right. He regretted it, but he didn't do anything about it. He created the biggest nuclear arsenal in the history of mankind. We still haven't recovered from that. And Kennedy, actually, contrary to everything you may have heard, was moving in the opposite direction. The moment he got into office with Robert McNamara as his Secretary of Defense, McNamara went over to the Pentagon and he asked very tough questions. He said, "Is there really a missile gap?" This is what they were saying, that Kennedy was saying during the actual campaign, but he didn't know the facts. McNamara came back and said, "No, there's no missile gap. We're way ahead of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is busted. They went through a war that wiped them out. 8 million people were killed. They're not going anywhere. They're not hardly going to invade Europe, much less do anything else. They're really trying to recover. They're interested in keeping the peace." So, but we invent this inflated threat that Russia is about to invade Europe. And obviously because of the Eastern European situation, which it also needs to be talked about, but we're not going to do that we're not going to get into a long discussion on it, but it's important that you understand the origins of these things. Otherwise, you're lost. You're living in a world of threat. Oh, the Russians are against us. The Chinese are against us. The Iranians are against us. Blah, blah, blah. They'll tell you anything you want. They'll hype it and they'll hype it. The media, it was very important in this matter. They, of course, reinforce the argument again and again. And the congressmen who don't know anything, they come together and of course they vote for the big appropriations. And before you know it, we're spending, $1 trillion a year now to prepare for war, not to go to war. Preparing for war is more important than going to war, because going to war would ruin our economy as well as the enemies, the so-called enemies.
Well, that's why there's a huge difference between supporting our troops versus supporting the military-industrial complex, which is very, very distinct. We do want to obviously get your opinion. I'm sure you do have a lot of thoughts about what or who was responsible for JFK's assassination. I maintain it was the CIA. I can't think of any other logical explanation, but certainly if you want to share.
But Lauren Steiner wanted to know if you think it was Alan Dulles. I mean, yeah, you got to read, what was the Devil's Chessboard?
David Talbot's book.
That to me was great. And that was part of the rabbit hole I ended up going down from your movie.
Yeah. David's a very smart man and he did a lot of research, and I think it's a great book. He also wrote another book before that called Brothers in 2007. Brothers is about Jack and Bobby. It's a great book. I urge you to pay attention to it, because a lot of the problems that crop up with the Dulles brothers are in that book. In fact, John F. Kennedy had more enemies than you can count by the time 1963 rolled around. You have to remember the Pentagon was furious with him. There was an atmosphere, people talk about this openly, atmosphere of hatred for him because of what he did at the Bay of Pigs. And then he compounded that by backing down at the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 in October. By not going to war, by not attacking Cuba, he angered the Pentagon lords as well as the CIA. He fired the chief of the CIA, Alan Dulles, and his assistants. And unfortunately, he didn't clean house. That was the problem, because at the end of the day, Richard Helms took over the CIA, although he was the assistant to McCone. Helms was a pure Dulles guy, and Dulles saw this. The Dulles brothers saw this as a titanic struggle between communism and Americanism and democracy, so to speak. And they were willing to go to any ends to destroy communism, even war. That was their danger of this situation. And the missile crisis was as close as we came to the nuclear holocaust that we all fear, because unknown to the American side, the Russians had missiles in Cuba, quite a few, and quite a few troops too, more than 1,000 anyway, several thousand, and they were ready for it. I don't know if it was a very dangerous situation, a hair trigger, the closest we've come to annihilation. I was a boy, I was in school, and we were pretty scared back then.
Yeah, my parents grew up in South Florida, and my mom remembers being on Miami Beach, and they were doing the duck and cover and all of those things that they were teaching them. And it was definitely very tense here, for sure.
We owe, you cannot praise John Kennedy enough for avoiding war. It cost him his life, but he really, really believed in peace. He made a beautiful peace speech. He signed a nuclear treaty with Russia, the first treaty we ever had with Russia after World War II. This is amazing. And the nuclear test treaty was an amazing achievement. He was proud of it beyond belief. And he died within 2 months of it.
Listen, his speech, the commencement speech he gave at American University in June of '63, that's one of the maybe 5 greatest speeches I think a president's ever given. And if anybody has not heard it, it's probably the best anti-war speech, the most unifying of the world speech I think I've ever heard. And what was it for you in 1967, 1968, that you ultimately decided, I am going to go serve my country, or were you simply drafted and that was just the way it was?
No, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But before I go into that, you should check out also his speech he gave right before that on civil rights. It's one of the most beautiful speeches I've ever heard, and it came after the problems at the University of Alabama with George Wallace. It's a beautiful speech, and the historians have not given him credit for stopping him and Khrushchev, because Khrushchev played a huge role, and they grew closer. They grew closer together, and so that was what led to the nuclear test treaty. But by this time, they were both reviled by the hardliners in both their governments, the Soviet hardliners and the American hardliners. And the strange thing is that Kennedy disappears from the scene, as we know, in November, and Khrushchev, less than a year later, is ousted. So the two heroes who saved the modern world pay for it in a deep way, Khrushchev lost all his power and was basically exiled, and it was a sad story.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.